injustice that's been happening, but also happy to speak more broadly to just what we've done as an organization as it relates to diversity and inclusion within our organization, which is kind of a journey we've been on since about 2010. Been on this journey for quite some time, but I wouldn't say we're nearly done yet. We have done a lot, but I think there's a lot more to do. So just wanted to open it up to start having some discussion on, where is your organization as it relates to some of the more recent incidents, and what have you done that you found helpful, or what have you learned from that, or what feedback are you getting from staff, and just kind of open it up for discussion. Well, I'm happy to kick it off with what we've done at the Federal Home Loan Bank. So one of the first things that we did, and I guess let me back up for a second. So that entire weekend after, the Mr. George Floyd incident, just, me in my role as D&I officer and reporting to the CEO, I found myself in a very almost uncomfortable space of, what do we say? What do we do? Obviously, being African American, what do I recommend, to the organization? What do I say to my president, CEO? What advice do I give her, as to what next steps should be for us? And I kind of struggled with that that entire weekend, because I wasn't sure how to start that conversation. And it wasn't anything to do with, her personally or the organization itself. She and I have a really close relationship, and, are very open with each other, but it was just kind of an awkward position I found myself in of this is the time where I obviously need to speak up. This is the time where I really need to show up, in my role. But how do I initiate that conversation to advise on what we should do, as an organization, and what that next step should be? And so when we started we have an exec team meeting every Monday morning. And one of the first things she brought up was this topic of, we need to do something, whether it's, an internal statement, an external statement, or, whatever that next step needs to be, that needs to be top of mind for our organization, and we need to do something. And so it was like a weight off of me, because it was something I was thinking about, that entire weekend of, what do we do? What do I say? What do I recommend? So that was really good to hear that from her. And I think that's really where it starts, with the organization. Sorry, my eyes are burning. That's really where it starts with the organization. Is it has to be top down. It has to be, from the board level, from the executive level. Because if it's not, you don't get that buy-in from the organization. They don't understand why it's important for the organization. So there has to be the top-down message of why this is important to the organization, why it's priority for the organization. So it was very, comforting to hear that message from her. And from that point on, it's, we've kind of hit the ground running, from that day on. So we started off with planning what we call candid conversations with the organization. So I think that was on a Monday when we had that conversation at the executive level, and our first session, I believe, was on Wednesday. So it was just in a matter of a couple of days, we really had to put together some thoughts and think about, okay, how do we have this conversation? Because we wanted staff to know that it was something that was important to us. It was priority. It was all over the news. It was one of those things of, how can you ignore this? How can you ask your employees to continue to come to work every single day, some of which, are feeling a multitude of feelings, and not say a word. So we wanted to do something quickly, to send the message that, we do care. This is top of mind. This is priority. And although we may not have the answers, and we still don't, we want to at least talk about it, and wanted people to feel comfortable talking about it. Everyone's talking about it, likely in their homes, with their friends, with other colleagues. So I think to be silent was definitely going to send the wrong message. So we started off with two candid conversations with our staff. We had about 150 maybe on the first call, and maybe about 160 or so on the second call. And we started off the conversation with just speaking to, some of the social injustice that has happened not only more recently, but we even provided some history, that went back several years. just to kind of show the that it is more systemic. And some people may or may not be aware, so we thought it was good to kind of set the foundation and provide just a little bit of education. And it wasn't, a long presentation or anything like that. It was, just a matter of minutes of just saying, this goes beyond, just today, this goes beyond just this one incident. And this is why it's now top of mind for so many and why there's so much anger, in the protesting, and because there's a lot of people that just, don't understand, how did it get to this point? Why are we here? Why is this such a big deal now? So we tried to set the stage from that perspective. And then we just opened it up for staff to just share, what are you feeling? What are you, what is it that you want to know? What are you curious about? So we really tried to focus on listening and educating also where we could. And we had a lot of staff that, were very candid with speaking to just their own experiences from, being an African American, what it's like, just driving home every day, what it's like, raising your children, and what are those conversations, that you're forced to have with them that are not only unfortunate, but uncomfortable, to have to say, well, yeah, if you're in this situation, this is how you have to handle it. Although someone else, who doesn't look like you may not have to handle it in this way, and just trying to get them to understand, why that is. When we may not always know why, but trying our best to explain that. So, it was extremely passionate. We had a lot of tears, we had a lot of emotion, and we got a lot of positive feedback, from staff following that call. And for our organization, that was a huge step for us. That was not something we had done in the past. We all have those, kind of that list of the things you just don't talk about at work. and that was probably one of them that we just really never brought up. And I mentioned we've been on our D&I journey for several years. And so there's a lot we do talk about, but, going into a conversation with that type of depth was something that we hadn't done. And just being, so candid and honest with each other. And I think that was a huge step for us. And I think it's going to be, pay huge dividends for us in the long run, because I think it kind of gave staff a sense of comfort that, okay, we're making progress. We can feel comfortable having these conversations and not, there being some sort of negative follow-up or negative reaction. And then following those conversations, we even had a subsequent discussion with our president, CEO, and just our African American staff. So she wanted to hear directly from them, to allow them to express themselves in kind of their own private form. And that was very well received as well. Just the fact that she even took the time, out to do that, to hear their perspective. And there was, more candor there. There were more tears there. There was, more passion there. So kind of the same reaction as the all staff one, but just kind of gave them their own personal platform, to share their experiences and even what we could do as an organization to continue to have these conversations and push the message forward. So I'll stop there for a moment and open it up to see if there's anything else that anyone else wants to share that, they found helpful within their organization, or any activities you've done or conversations you've had or anything you've done in response to, the social injustice thus far that you'd like to share.
They're doing.
Good morning. This is Rand Painter at the MBA. Thank you for your leadership today, and especially for stepping in at last minute. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis is a great partner, and certainly appreciate the panel that Felicia led at our convention year before last, which was very insightful. We had some similar discussions. Of course, we're a much smaller group than your team with just 14. Soon after George Floyd died, and some similar types of reactions. We then formed a small working group that has met periodically, determining how we should lead within our organization and how we might be a better resource for our member banks. And so that's something that's evolving. We're just getting started. Our group met yesterday, and the leader of that group and I talked earlier in the day and determined that it might be good for me as CEO not to be a part of the discussion yesterday, that there might be more free-flowing ideas. And so she and I are meeting tomorrow to do some recap of that with some recommendations. So we're just beginning. Not sure how to start, how best to start, but know that we need to begin. And so that's where we are. A lot of my teammates are on the call, and they may have more to add.
Good morning. My name is Natisha, and I am heading up the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion group at the MBA with Ryan. And I am just really excited about starting this off. MBA does a really good job of wanting to be inclusive and being adaptable and wanting to learn. And I think this is a great way, one, just to help the community, but to help the underprivileged community learn more about finance and how we can help them in that regards to help financial equity there. And I think that's a big part of our mission at the MBA. So I'm really excited about this group.
I'll add on to that. We've done some good research and some reach out to some of the African American and other minority business groups across the state, and having conversations not just around PPP and some perceived inequities and access at that point, but also in the realm of how do we better educate everyone on what it means to be a good credit customer, not just in a personal finance realm, but in a commercial finance realm. There are a lot of other pieces there that go into how do we evaluate access to credit and financial literacy as a whole. In Michigan, we don't have a robust financial literacy K-12 kind of program, which then creates issues for young adults and college students and all kinds of other pieces to that. We have regulatory issues that sometimes create some other hurdles to home ownership, which often is kind of the foundation for a lot of small business lending collateral. So we're looking at this as a very big picture, but how do we best work with our members, work with our regulators, work with our policymakers to remove some of those hurdles that are there still, that are not necessarily, I think part of the biggest problem is none of these are put in place intentionally. They are unintentional. And so it doesn't mean that they're not detrimental still, just because they were not intentional. But we still need to get through those and build that understanding and have a very, very eyes wide open approach to this, to removing some of those barriers in a meaningful way.
And Patricia, that's great. That's a lot of what came up in some of our conversations with our staff, is bringing up the idea of this goes beyond just, interactions with police officers. There are, more foundational issues that kind of get you to that point. But there are a lot of other challenges and inequities that need to be addressed aside from just the interactions with police officers. So that definitely came up in some of our conversations too, of, what can we do to help with some of those inequities, whether it be, financial literacy assistance or, fair housing, so kind of thinking about, what's tied to our mission and where we can assist. So I think that's a great point, is it really goes beyond what some may think is the issue today, but it's definitely deeper than just that. So similar to the MBA, we also formed a couple internal groups. So our president's EO, Cindy Koenig, she created a D&I executive committee coming out of this as well. And that was a committee that was formed that includes herself and several of her direct reports, and Felicia Roseberg, my D&I program manager, just to have some deeper conversations about what we really need to be focused on from an organizational perspective, and ensuring we have that tone at the top, which from my perspective, we've always had. Cindy's always been extremely supportive of our D&I program, and we have a bank-wide D&I strategic plan, but wanting to really give it that, to kind of elevate it, if you will, and to ensure that we are getting the results that we want and we think we need from an organizational perspective. So if there are certain areas that we really need to focus on, ensuring that we're getting that focus. So we've been meeting weekly since about June, I believe. So that's been established as a formal committee. And out of that committee, we've also formed now our second ERG, so an employee resource group. They may be called business resource groups in some organizations, but these are groups that are focused on a specific demographic. They can still include others that are not a part of that demographic. So we would call those allies, so individuals that are still supportive of that group and want to help it be successful. And we had about, I want to say about 37 individuals from the organization sign up for that ERG. We also had individuals select whether or not they would like to serve on the leadership team for that ERG. So we now have a leadership team in place as well. And we have that first meeting scheduled with them next week, where we'll be talking about, how to launch the group officially to the organization, start having some conversations about the goals for that group, ensuring that they align with the organizational goals. But we thought that was a good way to continue the great conversations we've been having, keep the momentum going, and give that group, that demographic, a platform to be able to help continue to educate the organization and provide some programming that helps to educate the organization on just more information about that demographic. So our first ERG, was a women's ERG that started about a year ago. And we've had some success with that group thus far. So this will be our second ERG. So we're excited about it, especially given, the current environment. So look forward to sharing some additional information at some point in the future as to how that's going. But got very positive feedback from staff thus far as it relates to, just making that the second ERG given our current environment. Anyone else willing to share some of the activities of their organization, or maybe even any questions you have about what others have done?
I have a question. When we talk about diversity training or talking about systemic racism, I've heard mixed messages about the validity of having training in that area, and would be interested in hearing if others have had that, and how it's been received, and if at the end of the day you felt that either were positive.
So
sure, I'm happy to. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you can't see me, but my name is Misty Stanton. I work for Mercantile Bank of Michigan in Grand Rapids. And so I'll speak a little bit to the training question you might have. So what we're doing, a lot of the things that what has been mentioned already is regarding educating our organization, our employees, communities on this DEI journey. But I have monthly webinars, virtual webinars, that we bring in speakers to talk about some of the different topics. And because this topic is so complex and we are all in different spaces and places, there's going to be information that you provide that some people will be able to grab from, and then others might say, they're not taking anything away with it. So I think in this work, you have to offer what you offer and let people get what they need from what you're providing, and then not worry about some of the things that are not, taken in by others. Because if you try to find this perfect solution for topics and this situation, then you run into some issues. I think you just have to identify some of the, when we talk about implicit bias, when we talk about creating awareness and action steps and things like that, you have to provide this information and let people gain or get what they need from it, because this is individual work. So we can provide all the resources, we can provide all the things that we need, but the self-assessment is people have to figure out what their role is and getting what they need to be successful, in whatever spaces they need to be in. So I think that providing educational tools, virtual, TED Talks, articles, books, all the things that you put it all out there and you let people grab what works for them, because people receive information differently. And this is a very emotional space. And so I think you just have to be mindful, like it's not some of the other things that we deal with in this industry where there's a solution, there's a handbook, there's a guide. We are developing individual prescriptions for our own organizations, which we have to be very mindful of that. I think that is where we can sometimes get tripped up, because what works somewhere else might not work somewhere else. So continue to provide the resources and the information and let people grab what they need to strengthen their awareness around DEI. And that's just, so monthly workshops, things like that.
That's helpful. Thank you, Misty.
You're welcome. I hope I didn't ramble on. Okay.
This is Brad Kessel. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. Okay, very good, Rand. Yeah, so I just have a question. I'm President CEO with Independent Bank, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'd say we're probably early in our maturity on the whole spectrum of this topic. And hey, it is what it is. And I think we want to mature. We want to grow here and be the best we can be as an organization and for our customers and for our markets. And when I think about this topic and we talk about it internally, we come back to, well, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? And so I'd be interested in hearing sort of what are your targets? How did you set those? How are you measuring your progress? So very, very simply, it's about goals, and then how do you measure your progress?
So for us, we have a D&I strategic plan. It's a 3-year strategic plan that's tied to our bank-wide 3-year plan. And there are 5 focus areas within that plan. So there's community, workforce, workplace, capital markets, and supplier diversity. So those are the 5 areas that we see as our focus areas related to different ways that we can touch D&I, if you will, or impact diversity and inclusion. From a regulatory perspective, we're required to focus on workforce, capital markets, and financial transactions, which is capital markets, or excuse me, supplier diversity, I apologize. So workforce, capital markets, supplier diversity. But we added workplace because we think that piece is important as it relates to the culture of the organization and engagement. And then we also added community because that ties just back to our mission of who we are and who we're here to serve and what we're here to do as a Federal Home Loan Bank. So those are the 5 focus areas that are that fall under our D&I strategic plan. And then each year we establish goals that are tied to each of those areas. And they're usually anywhere from maybe 3 to 5 goals that align under each of those areas. And we make sure we tie those back to the organizational goals so that obviously the entire plan aligns with what we're planning to achieve as an organization. But then how can you achieve those with D&I in mind as well? So that is reviewed annually by our board, reviewed and approved annually by our board of directors. And we update the board at least quarterly on the progress of those goals. So we establish specific targets for each of those goals under each of those areas. So we create what we call a dashboard that has the targets that are tied to each of those goals. And then we report on those on at least a quarterly basis to senior management and to the board. So that's kind of high level. Happy to share some more detail if you have more specific questions, but kind of high level, that's how we create our goals and track those related to diversity and inclusion.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I would say, I think that has really sent a positive message to our organization as well, to show that this is important to us and it is something that we're focused on and view as a priority by making it its own formal strategic plan. So I think that has helped us in our journey as well, because I think it's shown that this isn't just the flavor of the month. This isn't just, something that we're working on one year, we're going to forget about it the next year. I think it shows staff that, each year we're building upon those goals and thinking about how we can continue to further our journey as it relates to D&I.
Any other questions for Kania? Anything else you'd like to share that your bank is doing or your organization? All right, well, thank you so much, Kania. I appreciate you filling in last minute. Great conversation. Lots of good points and lots of things to think about. We appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge of what FHLBI has been doing and implementing. Appreciate that. So.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, and happy to fill in and provide some support.
Our pleasure. Thank you. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be offering more of these conversational type of webinars, and look forward to seeing you on the next one.